In this short video, I'd like to talk about the definition of stress, what stress does in the body, and our typical or automatic response to stress. Let's begin by defining stress. Hans Selye, a Canadian physician and scientist, was the first to describe the concept of stress and its impact on the body. He defined stress as the response of the body to any demand. Subsequent definitions add that stress is a response of the body to any demand that is perceived as taxing or exceeding one's resources. It's important to note that, according to the definition, an event is stressful when we perceive that we do not have enough resources to face it. This means that both pleasant and unpleasant events can be sources of stress. For example, extremely positive and happy events, such as getting married, expecting a child, getting a job promotion, can be very stressful if we perceive that the event is stretching our resources. On the other hand, negative events, if we feel supported and if we feel that we have resources available, might not be perceived as very stressful. All stressors can be classified into four main types, although a stressor may belong to more than one type. The four main types are acute, caused by a single event. For example, being caught in a traffic jam when usually there is very little traffic. Number two, chronic stressors, which are ongoing stressors. For example, being stuck in a traffic jam every single day. The third type is external. These are caused by external events or events from outside our bodies. So for example, a traffic jam. And then the fourth type is internal. These are caused by our own thoughts and feelings. For example, feeling frustrated or worried about being stuck in a traffic jam. Other examples of acute stressors might be having an argument, receiving a negative email, catching a cold, experiencing a robbery, etc. If some of these acute stressors continue for a long time, they can become chronic. So having an argument is acute, but being in a dysfunctional relationship is chronic. Receiving a negative email is acute, but working in a toxic environment becomes chronic. Catching a cold is acute, but receiving a cancer diagnosis is chronic. For external stressors, many positive life events are external stressors. For example, getting married, getting pregnant, getting a promotion, buying a new house, moving. Negative life events are also external stressors. For example, the death of a loved one, experiencing a divorce, having a health diagnosis. External stressors also come from the environment, so noise or light or pollution can all be external stressors. As well, they can come from our workplaces, from such things as demanding bosses, urgent deadlines, excessive workloads, etc. Unpredictable events are also external. For example, a sudden rent increase, a sudden job loss, or even unexpected house guests. So there are many things that come from outside, of which we have no control, and these are external stressors. Again, internal stressors come from inside ourselves. They come from our thoughts, our behaviors, our mindset, our expectations. Some examples include feeling rushed or pressuring ourselves, feeling like a failure, being a perfectionist, feeling uncertain, worrying a lot, feeling anxiety. So how do we experience stress? Well, it is felt in our bodies. This is because stress is defined as a physical response to something, a feeling, situation, or an event that interferes with our sense of well-being. It's a feeling that our resources are taxed. So stress shows up in the body. It's a physical response. Let me say that again. By definition, stress is a physical response. In the body, stress shows up as a racing heart, fast and shallow breathing, excessive sweating, dilated pupils, muscle tension, and a redistribution of the blood circulation so that the blood is sent more to the muscles and less to the internal organs, such as the stomach and intestines. Regardless of whether our stress is acute or chronic, these physical responses occur to a greater or lesser degree. And regardless of whether we have an external stressor, for example, a hurricane, or an internal stressor, worrying, these same physical responses occur. Having these physical responses occur all the time is really detrimental to our physical health. Prolonged stress is very damaging to the body and damaging to our physical and mental health. So why does the body react in this way? The stress response is deeply rooted in our biology and is efficiently designed for our survival. The problem is that this design worked best when we were hunters living in the jungle, and the demands and dangers of the jungle are quite different from what we face now. In the jungle, dangers were often short-lived, for example, a tiger on the prowl. Then the danger would pass and there would be a period of relative peace and quiet. As well, the stresses in the jungle are mostly physical, and so it makes sense to react with a physical reaction. But in modern times, most of our stressors are in the mental realm. This means that the stress reaction, a physical reaction, is less well suited to the way we live in the modern world. And because our mental stressors come from our almost constant thoughts, our body does not get a chance to recover from the physiological reactions of stress. Our bodies end up constantly under stress, and this increases the likelihood of health problems. I'm going to show you a model of stress called the triangle of stress. This model is one way of demonstrating how we react to stress. Starting at the top, we experience a stressor. The stressor can be acute or chronic, external or internal. When we experience this stressor, we experience an activation or response in the body. This activation response are those physical responses that we talked about, the increased heart rate, the faster breathing, the increased sweating, the pupil dilation, the increased muscle tension, etc. This activation response comes about when a hormone called adrenaline is released. Adrenaline helps to ramp things up in the body. It helps to bring energy and activation to the body, preparing the body for action. When we need it, adrenaline gives us a big burst of energy and then it falls off immediately. You've probably experienced that big burst of adrenaline and then the crash afterwards. There's a second stress hormone that's also activated called cortisol. Unlike adrenaline, which goes up and comes down, cortisol is slow in ramping up and slow in coming down. It stays in the body for a long time. So we need big pauses between acute stressful events to give enough time for cortisol to come down and to be excreted from the body. If we have continuous or chronic stressful events, then cortisol ramps up and stays in the body because there is not enough time for it to come down. This excessive cortisol in the body is very damaging to the body, to both physical and mental health. So if we're in the jungle and a tiger jumps out at us, we have a stressor which causes activation. So we're moving down the left side of this triangle. The bigger the stressor, or the longer the stressor is around, the larger the activation response. In the jungle, when we have escaped the tiger, we relax again and the body calms down. Adrenaline comes down quickly and cortisol goes down slowly as we begin to relax and the activation reduces. This activation is called our fight, flight, freeze response. When there is a big stressor, like a tiger in the jungle, our body sets itself up to either fight, to flee or to run from it, or to freeze, to play dead. This physiological activation of the body, this fight, flight, freeze response, feels uncomfortable, and we are motivated to reduce these feelings of discomfort. Almost automatically, we react to do something to reduce discomfort and feel better. This is an amazing thing about humans. We have an amazingly fast ability to react to problems and create potential solutions. We have an amazingly fast ability to do something about feelings of discomfort, and we are very fast at finding ways to cope. So in the jungle, We might find that we're getting chased by tigers every day. So our brilliant thinking brain says, we have to do something about this. So we might move our camp. We might set traps. We react by doing something to solve our problem. So if you look at the base of the triangle, we go from activation to reactivity via the doing mode. Our activation causes us to think about doing something that will help to ease the fight, flight, freeze response. In the jungle, we might move our camp away from where tigers hang out. That's a reactive response. In modern times, our dangers are not physical, and so we can't move away from them. Our typical modern day reaction is to distract ourselves, numb ourselves, avoid or resist the feelings of discomfort that come from the fight, flight, freeze reaction. And so we find ways to cope. We might have a few drinks of alcohol to numb ourselves. We might eat to numb ourselves. We might work harder. We might spend more time watching TikTok videos. We might listen to music. We might go for a walk. There are many things that we might do. Our new solutions, these reactive coping strategies, have their own effects. Along the base of the triangle, we can move back and forth between reactivity and activation because our reactivity affects our activation. For example, if the reactive strategy was helpful, for example, going for a walk, it may calm us and calm our activation. But if the strategy was not helpful, it may activate us even more. Our reactive coping strategies, these fast reactive solutions that we generate to reduce discomfort, may be an adaptive strategy that helps us. And for many of our adaptive strategies, if done in moderation and for a short time, they may be helpful to us. But often, these strategies become maladaptive and they end up increasing our stressors, and we go around the triangle again and again. In modern times, we don't have tigers jumping out at us, but we might have a boss who jumps out at us. So the boss is the stressor at the top of the triangle. Every time they pop out at us with a new deadline or complaint, we come down the left side of the triangle and we activate. Our heart pumps, we get a feeling of overwhelm, our adrenaline and cortisol kick in. So moving along the base of the triangle, we react, we find a way to cope. Often our reactions are automatic in that we're not overtly thinking of what we can do to reduce these feelings of discomfort. In fact, we simply start to do something to make ourselves feel better. We might work harder. We might go home and yell at the family. We might eat 3 bags of potato chips for comfort. We might go home and drink 2 bottles of wine. Just like the solutions in the jungle, the reactions we have to our boss may or may not decrease our activation, and it may or may not affect our stressor. If, for example, our response is to automatically go home and yell at the family, then very soon we will move up the right side of the triangle and have a new stressor. Perhaps we have family problems. And then we go around and around this triangle. In the jungle, big stressors are acute, which means after the tiger jumps out and you run away, things calm down and adrenaline and cortisol go down. In our modern world, our stressors often are chronic. For example, they have to do with our job, our family, our relationships, our health. This means that we are going up and down the left side of the triangle between stress and activation all the time, with no time for calming down. Adrenaline and cortisol both stay elevated. Recall that cortisol is slow to come down, so if we activate too often, cortisol does not come down, and we keep building up more and more cortisol. This excess of cortisol has huge negative health consequences. Physical conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, irritable bowel syndrome, etc., become more likely. And mental conditions, for example, burnout, addictive behaviors, anxiety, depression, etc., also become more likely. In our modern times, in these situations, many of our quote unquote solutions, our reactions are automatic. We don't sit and say, oh, I think I'll eat 3 bags of chips, or oh, I think I'll drink 2 bottles of wine. We just eat the 3 bags of chips or drink the 2 bottles of wine. So these so-called solutions created in automatic pilot actually create new stressors. Well, you see on the right side of the triangle, it says adaptation strategies. In reality, in automatic pilot, many of our adaptation strategies are maladaptive. We yell too much, we eat too much, we drink too much, we gamble too much, we sleep too much, we worry too much, etc., etc. And if we are often automatically using maladaptive strategies or avoidance strategies, it can lead to a negative downward spiral. All of this happens. Most often, it happens without our being aware that we're doing it. We react in automatic pilot. We react without awareness of what we are doing. One important thing we talked about at the beginning of this course was perception. Remember the images of the vase and the faces, or the image of the saxophone player and the face? These images show us that different people can see things differently. And also it shows us that when we open up, we can learn ourselves to see things differently. Applying this to stress, all of us perceive stress differently, but the amazing thing is that we can learn for ourselves to perceive stress differently. It's not the actual stressor that is stressful per se, it's our relationship to it, our perception of it. Next week, we're going to talk about a different way to deal with the triangle of stress. But because so much of what is happening in this triangle happens in automatic pilot, I want to point out the first step in changing our perception of stress is to come out of automatic pilot. It is to pay attention, to become aware, to become mindful.